bullying, what the difference is, what bullying is, and what to do about it in the workplace. Okay. Goals. What is harassment? What isn't harassment? I want to engage in discussion. I kind of want to, hear what your opinion is on certain things, and what you think is too much, too little, overly sensitive, and so forth. We'll talk about bullying. What are your rights? What are your responsibilities? In the video, obviously, I thought it was interesting. The one section said, well, what if you see somebody else doing it? Can you laugh along? Or do you have an obligation to say something? So, something to think about in application for you guys is, what is that situation really like for you on the job site? Or for you doing something. If somebody's saying a joke that's off color, and this isn't just with respect to sexual harassment, although that's the main focus, but all those protected categories we're going to talk about, how do you handle it if somebody's crossing the line on something as a colleague, coworker, obviously as a supervisor as well. So those are the issues kind of that we need to talk about. Boundaries, what's acceptable, what's unacceptable. We'll talk about the legal remedies as well. Let me just ask, are there women in this company besides the one and a couple more? Are you guys working with women routinely?
Usually with the agencies we work with, we interact with the engineers and stuff.
Okay, so there is interaction with females. Just for the record, there are no women in the audience. Okay, so there is...
So from a managerial standpoint, out in the field, the foreman, the guys here, people that they oversee, a handful, very few.
Not too much.
Correct.
Okay.
I mean, there is, like Kevin said, interaction with the owners from people from other companies, but not so much with the supervisors, just only a handful.
Okay. So on a day-to-day basis, would you say sexual harassment is something that's, is that something you're seeing, or is that an issue just based on the kind of demographics of the company? Not so much. You still can't. I can turn the mic on. All right. So what I was asking was basically, how much are you interacting with women? Is it something that is frequent, such that this training needs to focus on male-female relations in the workplace? Because this obviously
Absolutely does.
It does.
Yes.
All right. Good. Because I'd be pretty short on material if it didn't. All right. So how many hours a week do you spend at Mountain Cascade? 40, 50? 60? All right. A lot of people are spending more time at work than they're spending, at home, right? We all have a lot of, job requirements and responsibilities. So this is your home away from home. This is, in many cases, you spend more time with these people and with your coworkers than you do at home. So just like at your home, you've got certain rules, whether it's, take your shoes off or do the dishes or whatever. This is your company culture, right? These are your house rules in the handbook, and you guys as supervisors and managers, everybody is looking to you to sort of create and maintain the company culture. So, whether it's going to be important, whether you let something slide or whether you pull somebody aside and say, hey, we don't talk that way. This is, we don't treat people that way in this company, et cetera, right? You guys are the ones who are creating and maintaining that culture. And then finally, heightened standard of conduct. In a lot of companies, some construction companies, you might have some people who, maybe they just graduated college and they're used to a fraternity type environment, or they're used to how they relate to people in the bars. Most of you guys seem a little bit older, so you've been around a bit, but understanding that the way that you talk at home, the way that you talk, with your buddies, is not the way that you can talk at work, right? Just there is a heightened standard of conduct. Something that's a funny joke that maybe everybody thinks is funny, as soon as that enters the workplace, you've got some major liability on your hands and a serious problem. So how many people do you supervise? Like, just is it a range, or how many, half dozen? Okay, so it may not be, the harassment may not be coming from one of you, but obviously you are responsible for a bunch of other people. So part of this is, just taking the time to think, how am these people looking up to me? They're looking to me to set the tone for this thing. How am I going about it? And then, just like I said, obviously a lot has happened since Me Too. A lot of political movements, a lot of social movements. So the stakes are high. Like we said last time, something that might seem funny, it loses the humor really fades when it's blown up as an exhibit in the courtroom, or when a judge is reading your joke, it just doesn't sound as funny. So all things to keep in mind. This slide was here last time, but basically Arnold is the reason that we're here. He was accused of groping some women, and so he said, all right, everybody has to be trained on anti-harassment every 2 years. That's the history of the law. This is more important. As managers and supervisors, if you do the harassing, Mountain Cascade is automatically liable. That's why it's so important, specifically to you. You are agents of the company. Essentially, you are Mountain Cascade. So if you are the one that is doing it, or is essentially found guilty of doing it, immediate liability for the company, right? If your actions result in a hostile work environment, the only way Mountain Cascade can avoid liability is if it can prove that it reasonably tried to prevent and correct behavior, and then that you didn't take advantage of any of those attempts to correct the behavior. So part of this training is MCI demonstrating that it is taking reasonable steps to prevent harassment, right? You got to sit here and watch videos and listen to me talk. So this is preventative on the part of the company to protect the company from liability as well. All right, so what if the harassment is taking place from a non-supervisory employee? The question is, did you know and did you fail to act, right? So when you're supervising those people, it's important to keep an eye on what's going on. I don't know how, I assume you know what's going on within your crew or the people that you're supervising, but if something happens, if somebody says something, this goes back to our documentation discussion, you can't sit idly by, right? Has anybody had a situation where somebody that you supervise, let's say, maybe not even with sexual harassment, but did or said something that was over the line, that was offensive, and you had to pull them aside and kind of put them in check? You've had that situation? A couple times?
Yeah.
That's good. Okay. Did you write them up in that situation, or is it more like just a stern talking to?
I didn't think we have had it to write up.
Gotcha. Okay. It's good. So if somebody says something, the burden is on you to keep them in check and take prompt and appropriate corrective action. All right, so we talked a little bit about this. This is what it used to be based on Title VII of the Civil Rights Act. This is California's protections. This is what we were talking about in the previous training, but as you can see, the protected categories are extensive, right? and we're going to talk primarily about sexual harassment, but harassment on account of national origin, on account of race, any one of these protected categories is essentially a potential liability for harassment. So, and most of what we're going to talk about here isn't something as blatant as, offering someone a job in return for a sexual favor. Most of the things that are happening are repeated over time, and it's more of a slow kind of build up in terms of the harassing behavior. Sources of law, much like in the discrimination, multiple bodies of law, a bunch of case law. A lot of this stuff has been litigated. Is it important that you know all these different sources of law? Not really. Just know, every time you read the paper, somebody else is getting in trouble for some sort of sexual harassment thing, right? So the most important takeaway from this training, I hope that everybody knows how to treat someone with respect and how to be a gentleman. So that I hope that, you don't need to learn how not to harass people, right? Hopefully you already know that, but an important takeaway is obviously just recognizing how high the stakes are. Much like in the discrimination training that we were talking about, we need people to walk away from this just so that, red flag, light bulb goes off, that could be a problem, let me talk to somebody. If you walk away with with the recognition of, all right, this is a changing landscape in the United States and particularly California, that's a win, right? Realizing that it has never been so, people have never been so touchy. Touchy is not the right word to use. People have never been so, you might say sensitive or litigious or quick to pull, to say, oh, this is harassment, this isn't harassment. I had a client, it was a catering company, and the chef was talking to an employee who was doing something wrong, and he put his hand on her shoulder and said, I need you to do better. And she went straight to HR, said, I didn't want to be touched like this, I need time off, I need, X, Y, and Z. Maybe 10 years ago, 15 years ago, that wouldn't have been a thing, right? We'll talk about whether that was necessary or appropriate or not, but you might think, wow, that wasn't a big deal. I put my hand on her shoulder. I didn't mean anything. I wasn't sexually harassing this person. But that's the sort of, we're at high alert right now, okay? Most of the cases on sexual harassment are going to come under the Fair Employment and Housing Act. So if somebody's doing some harassing here, chances are the letter is going to come from FEHA, or it's going to be a private lawsuit. So this is an old statistic, but it's not too old. I think I updated it. 201 prominent men. The reason I'm asking about women is really it's men doing most of the sexual harassing. It's happening, women, and it's, male on male harassment is prevalent too, but it's pretty much men doing the harassing. Predominantly it's men getting busted for doing the harassment as well. The other aspect of this is once you've been accused, now it's different in the workplace, but obviously on the social scale, these people are resigning after they've been accused. It's not like they're, an investigation. It's not like there's an investigation taking place and they're actually being formally found guilty. Once the accusation hits, they're already getting fired from their jobs. So, in this particular area of the world or area of, what's taking place in America, in some ways, you're just, as soon as you're accused, you're in big trouble, right? I haven't gotten any laughs on any of these, so nothing's changing so far. All right, so what is harassment, right? Physical harassment. What's an example of physical harassment?
Punching.
Punching? That's also assault and battery. Anything a little more subtle?
Tripping somebody.
That one's good. What'd you say? Who said tripping? Why is everything like violence related coming from the back?
Oh, I guess hugging, kissing, like spanking.
That's more. We're getting closer to kind of the answers I was looking for, right? Yep, that's a great one. That's for visual. We'll get there. Physical harassment, right? Yeah, assaulting somebody. I don't know. You could probably, a good attorney would throw that in with harassment, depending on where you punched them. But generally speaking, what I'm talking about is an unwanted touching, right? Smacking somebody's butt, maybe something less blatant than that, just putting your arm around somebody, right? Essentially in the workplace, any kind of touching that the person being touched really didn't want, okay? Depending on the where and the how, depends on whether it's, this is a harassment case or whether it's less severe but still needs a talking to. How about verbal harassment? Catcalls, it's a good one, especially for construction. That's like the stereotypical construction verbal harassment. Any other verbal harassment ideas? Can you repeat that? What was that one? That was
Calling our equipment manager on the phone.
okay. Sorry. All right.
What are you calling him?
Certainly, how you. That's a good point. Calling people names, right? How are you addressing somebody? You can exactly. You can, depending on how you address somebody. Obviously, that can be verbal harassment. Emails, text messages. Obviously, we've touched on this before, but anything you email, anything you email, it's there forever, especially on the company server. That stuff will come back to haunt you. So even if, like Andre was saying in the previous training, even if it's between you and a 20-year colleague and, it's just simply joking or in jest, that can be used in the future as evidence that this harassment did take place, right? So anything that's permanent, be extremely conscious of what you're saying. How about visual harassment?
That would be the elevator eyes.
What did you call it?
Elevator eyes.
Elevator eyes. All right. Yeah, that's a good one. Does anybody remember the forklift case? Did I talk about that in the last ones? Somebody might. But this is a good visual harassment case. There was a company that had a assembly line, and an attractive young woman was hired. And this forklift driver right away started hitting on her, asked her out. She said no. He said, I just want to eat you up all over. That's from the court document. And that was the extent of their exchange. Nothing else was said between them. But what happened was she showed up to work, and he would drive his forklift, and he'd park it by the assembly line, and he'd just sit there and stare at her. That would creep me out. Visual harassment, right? And then sexual advances, that's pretty self-explanatory. We don't need any examples of that. All right, so there's two types of sexual harassment that are legally recognized. The first is kind of your Harvey Weinstein sexual harassment. Quid pro quo, right? A term of employment conditioned on submission to unwelcome sexual advances. If you want to work this job or in this industry, or if you want me to put in a good word for you, etc., X, Y, or Z, right? This is the blatant sexual harassment. This is frankly what I didn't think was happening all over the place anymore. I thought of this as more of like something that took place in the Mad Men era, for example. But people are still doing this quite a bit. Quid pro quo harassment is alive and not well, but it's definitely happening. So it's either an offer or it's a threat, right? Pretty self-explanatory. One aspect of the video that is pertinent to this is, the power dynamic between you and whomever at work. I mean, the video was talking about asking somebody out, but anytime there is, you're somebody's boss, right? If you have some attractive woman that works for you, there is a power disparity there. So your interactions, your exchanges are going to be, that power dynamic is never not there. And it'll be recognized. Now we're going to talk about the kind of harassment that's much more likely to get you in trouble or the company in trouble without you seeing it coming. More of a creeping up on you type thing. And this is where the heightened awareness of what's being said and what's being done really comes into play. Hostile work environment is the kind of harassment that's not one incident. It's not, can Mount Cascade be sued if somebody says one off-color joke to a female coworker? No, it doesn't rise to the level of harassment, But if over the course of time, that female coworker is consistently, leered at, whistled at, talked to in a certain way, called derogatory names, over time, that's going to create a hostile work environment, which makes sense, right? If every time you went to work, everybody was looking at you in a certain way on account of your sex or, treating you in a certain way because you are a woman, eventually you would start to feel like the work environment is not a friendly place. And that's how this body of law kind of came about, right? Courts and legislatures started to realize that, it's not just, the guy, the boss calling the secretary in and saying if she wants a raise, she has to come sit on his lap or something. This is much more subtle over the course of time. And this is where the national origin, the race, the disability, the age, these different protected categories, in the same way that a repeated treating a woman in a certain way, repeating sexual jokes and looking at her, the same thing could be with respect to somebody's race or where somebody's from or if they have a disability or if they're older, right? In Silicon Valley right now, there's all these companies that have a bunch of 20-something-year-olds, all these startups. It's not, I'm sure it's happened, it's completely feasible that there would be somebody who's, say, 42 and everybody else in his immediate working circle is 28. And, if every day he was called old timer, old man, or something like that, that's the kind of thing that over time, it might actually turn into a problem for the company. So the takeaway with hostile work environment is if you're hearing things, if you're supervising your people and you hear people, over the course of time saying or doing certain things, recognize that it's not as simple as, oh, they just said something that wasn't that bad in this one time. If they say it every day, it's something that needs to be addressed, right? So it's a major, if there's one really critical takeaway, it's, pay attention to these seemingly innocuous comments, seemingly, harmless things, and things that are more offensive, right? And recognize that this is the beginning of something that could be problematic, okay? So what does a victim of hostile work environment, sexual harassment have to prove? Well, they have to prove that it actually disrupted their ability to work. I don't think it's that difficult for someone to prove if they, went and saw a psychiatrist about it, if they had a decrease in performance. This is something that, is not super difficult to prove. That it affected their ability to perform their job, or undermine their personal sense of well-being, right? So basically, if you are a victim of hostile work environment harassment, you've got to prove that this really had an effect on you, right? And that your ability to work was impaired. So what do courts look at? What do they consider? It's a sliding scale, right? Terrible conduct only has to happen once, you know? Assaulting or physically touching somebody in an inappropriate sexual manner, that could be sexual harassment right there, right? Something more subtle, like maybe there's a group of people and they're always telling jokes, and somebody else, maybe they're telling jokes that have racial implications, right? And somebody else outside of that group of people hears it every day, right? Overhearing somebody tell a joke or a sexual joke or something like that, you're overhearing it. It's not that big of a deal. But if it happens so much that it seems like there's this culture in this company of talking a certain way or acting a certain way, that's happened over time, right? So that's the sliding scale aspect to the severity of the conduct, or to the frequency of the conduct. And then circumstances, right? In the workplace, outside the workplace. If coworkers are out at a happy hour and somebody says something that's off color, maybe courts would consider that a little less severe than obviously if you're in the sterile work environment. Of course, saying something outside of work is still problematic. You're with your coworkers, and you got to work with them the next day. So even if it happens outside of work, it's still an issue. It still needs to be addressed because it's going to be brought into work the following day. All right, so let's kind of explore the gray areas and what you can do and what you can't do. Is it okay to tell a sexually explicit joke at work? Does anybody say, yeah, that's okay sometimes? Sometimes. You can just, yeah?
It's a judgment call.
It's a judgment call. Okay. Does anybody say you should never ever tell a sexually explicit joke at work? We got one. Does anybody tell sexually explicit jokes at work? Not in construction. Not in your industry. Obviously, it's easy to say conduct to be avoided. Don't do this. But the reality of it is, you might have a funny joke, and maybe your audience is, all the dudes at this table, and you know that none of them are going to be offended, and nobody else is going to hear. Maybe that's okay, but you absolutely have to know your audience and the context. And if there's any kind of ambiguity, obviously err on the side of not telling it. So I'm not standing up here saying never joke, never say anything, because that's just not realistic. But the important thing is, what's the context? What's your audience? And in general, no, you really should keep that out of the workplace. Do your buddies or do your coworkers really need to hear that sexually explicit joke? Probably not. Like, everything will keep functioning without you telling that joke. So, with the people you supervise as well, sometimes it might just be as simple as, hey, just leave that out. Just keep that out of here. It might have been funny, I get it, but this is 2019. This is not the time to be playing in the gray or saying something that could be, overheard or misconstrued. Making requests for a date with someone who is not interested. Can you make a request for a date with someone at work? Who says yes, you can ask somebody out at work? We got some yeses. Who says no, you cannot ask somebody out at work? We got a no. We got a lot of undecideds in this part of the room. I like this one because it says making a request for a date with someone who is not interested. So if you're going to ask somebody out, you better be sure that they're going to say yes, right? And if they say no, don't ask them again if they say no, you know. It may be a theme in movies where the guy gets rejected throughout the movie, and in the end she realizes that he was her true love, and he is rewarded for his perseverance in asking her out over and over again. Yeah, maybe that doesn't happen. It's great in the movie, but at work, that's called sexual harassment. So asking somebody out, okay, that's probably acceptable. Be smart, understand, you know, whether or not they're interested, and then if they're not interested, that's the end of it. It cannot come up again. So, you know, that's a pretty touchy subject, and you better be pretty darn sure she's going to say yes. Making suggestive, obscene comments. I don't think anybody's going to say, yeah, there's a place for obscene comments in work. How about walking up behind, you know, the female coworker and giving her a little shoulder rub? Stressful, a lot happening. Is that okay? Anybody think that's okay? No brave soul is going to say it's okay to massage someone. Yeah, I'm going to say that massaging someone is on the side of the line that is unacceptable. Don't ever do it, right? Don't discuss sexual thoughts or fantasies or activities. Conduct to be avoided, unwelcome touching. There's an interesting case that was actually last year. There was a sheriff who had a sexual harassment case brought against him, and the woman in the sheriff's department said, he is always hugging me. He's touching me in a way that I don't want to be touched. And the sheriff's defense was, you know, I'm just a hugger. I'm a guy who likes to hug. I didn't mean anything by it. I'm just a hugger. So they, you know, discovery, they kind of look into it. Well, it turns out he was only hugging the women. He wasn't hugging any of the men. So his defense failed, right? So if you're going to be a hugger, you better hug the men too. But in all seriousness, how about hugging at work? Is there ever a time to hug at work? Does anybody say you should never hug a woman at work?
Probably never should. People do.
Again, it's kind of, it's unreal. What did you say?
It absolutely just has to be mutual. And it truly has to be mutual. It can't be like quid pro quo. It can't be anything, you know, anything like that. It has to be mutual.
Right. It absolutely.
You're better off having it be initiated by the female.
Yeah, it'd be a lot better if she hugged you, right? People hug, right? You know, realistically, if you haven't seen a coworker in a long time, you're going to give her a hug, or, you know, I don't know, you complete a big project, you might give someone a hug, but, you know, it really comes down to how are you doing it? What's your intention behind it? Is it okay with the person, right? You know, if somebody just doesn't want to be hugged, you need to know that, and they need to tell you if you do ever hug them. But generally speaking, you shouldn't be hugging people at the workplace. Occasionally, under certain circumstances, fine, but you know, as a general rule, it's like you shouldn't be hugging the women in the workplace. I know you don't date guys from work. I could fire you Friday and hire you back Monday morning. More conduct. All right. How about pin up calendar on your cubicle? Anybody say that's okay? Let's say it's a female employee and she has a sexy fireman calendar on her cubicle. Is that okay? I'd say, do you really need that there, right? It's kind of the gray area, right? Most people wouldn't care, you know? Maybe you got the Sports Illustrated swimsuit issue in your locker or something. Well, that one you would only see. But let's say you have Sports Illustrated swimsuit issue up on your cubicle or your office wall. Do you really, is it worth it? Do you need that up there so badly that you're going to make everybody else see it? You know, is there is that going to create sexual harassment for people walking by? Maybe not, but is there any reason to do it? I don't think so. How about just complimenting how a woman dresses? Oh, you look really nice in that outfit. Is that appropriate? Anybody say yes? Can you compliment a woman on how she looks?
Better know him pretty well.
I don't really think we can say much about it. It sounds better off just to not say anything. Or
Just head down and don't do anything?
just a good, clean high five.
High fives?
Not even that. Head down, walk straight.
Head down, don't make eye contact.
Don't touch them.
Well, I'm not saying, I'm asking you what you think, Most of this comes down to this, right? Are you a creep or are you not a creep? If you were going to compliment how someone dresses, you could say it in a way that'd be very creepy, and you could say almost the same thing in a way that's totally cool, right? So a lot of this gray area comes down to how are you being perceived and knowing your audience, okay? This isn't, rocket science. Everybody knows somebody that's always coming across wrong or being creepy or crossing the line with women. I think we've been around enough to know kind of how that kind of dynamic can be. But the important thing for purposes of training is, being able to disseminate to your people and being able to tell them whether they're doing something wrong or, overstepping the line. So going back to, previously you were mentioning, how is the internet and social media affecting the world of employment law? Well, everybody has access to stuff at all times, right? You can send a meme via Instagram. You can send a picture via text message. You can do stuff on email. The bottom one kind of blows my mind. 70% of porn web traffic is during business hours.
Is that at business or is it during business hours?
Well, during business hours. So presumably there are some unemployed people during business hours that are looking at porn. But I think there are probably a number of people doing it, right? So don't watch porn at work. It's an important takeaway. But yeah, 27% of organizations have faced a sexual e-harassment claim. That means it's happening a lot, right? It means this stuff, emails and texts and how you talk to people. And, I've seen it with people that I work with where, they get into a flirtatious conversation and they send some stuff that really shouldn't be sent, right? People can get carried away really quick, especially if it's a guy who's looking for attention and, some female employees kind of playing along with it, right? That's where that awareness needs to come in. Like, whoa, this is a coworker, this is an employee, this needs to stop immediately, right? The important takeaway from this is people that feel they've been harassed or people that they need to know that they can go to multiple sources, right? Multiple outlets. If you as a supervisor really shouldn't say to the folks that you supervise, you absolutely have to come to me first. Ideally they should come to you first because there's sort of a chain of command in place here, but maybe they don't feel comfortable coming to you. They need to know they can go to HR, they can go to, another supervisor if they're comfortable. That's an important part of this is knowing that people have multiple avenues if they feel that they've been harassed. And that's part of having a support system, right? Just creating a culture where, hey, if you're not comfortable talking to this person, talk to that person.
Has the current wave of sexual allegations left you scared, confused, maybe even a little angry? Is the culture shifting under your feet so fast you can't make sense of it? Or do you simply not know how to behave at work anymore? Fear not. Here are frequently asked questions about sexual harassment. Number 1. Is it okay to greet your coworker with a deep full-body hug or mouth kiss? No. This is what we call unwelcome touching. But you're an affectionate and friendly person. The touching's not sexual. It's just kind of your personal brand at work. Still, it's a no. Number 2. Is it okay to think a coworker looks sexy in their pants? Sure. Think away. But is it okay to tell that person that you think they look sexy? No. You may not know this, but people aren't always looking for feedback on the way they look, even if you think you're being nice and flattering. It's entirely possible that they just really like the way they look in those pants. Number 3. This is where things start to get confusing. Can you ask someone out at work? Maybe. But consider the following questions first. What kind of power dynamic exists? Are you their boss? Do you have a more secure job? Is there a possibility that this person might fear getting fired if they say no or report you? Is it possible the vibe you think you're picking up on is just them trying to be nice? If the answer is yes to any of these questions, just don't do it. Number 4. Let's go even deeper. You aren't making the inappropriate comments or doing the groping, but you've seen it, and you've heard rumors. Can't you just laugh along? Or simply just roll your eyes and ignore it? I mean, does it really have to be your problem? Yeah, it's your problem. It's like a Ouija board. If you're not pushing or pulling, then the people who are pushing and pulling get to make the rules. The world is changing under your feet, ultimately for the better. But it will take you and everyone around you to be a little more sensitive, aware, and open to learning a new way. All people expect to be treated with respect and to feel safe at work. So follow this simple guide, and if you're still confused, please check out our website, www.don'tpullyour@work.obviously. Thank you.
Okay, we got one more video on bullying, and then we'll talk about it a little bit.
In a major national survey, 35% of American adults reported that they have experienced bullying behaviors at work, and another 15% said they have witnessed others being bullied. Workplace bullying can have serious repercussions for the employees and the organization alike. Severely bullied workers may suffer a variety of health consequences, including depression and anxiety disorders. Bullying can also diminish productivity and morale and lead to higher absenteeism and turnover. It can even increase employee benefit costs and the risk of legal action. On occasion, resulting bad publicity can tarnish the organization's reputation. Workplace bullying may be direct, such as repeated yelling and verbal humiliation, hostile glares, or silence and deliberate exclusion. Or it may be more indirect, such as behind-the-back sabotage, spreading damaging rumors, or imposing unreasonable work demands designed to make the target fail. Supervisors are the most frequent aggressors, followed by peers. In instances of mobbing, employees gang up to bully a coworker. Prevention is key for any organization. It starts with leaders who encourage mutual respect in the workplace and send a message that bullying and similar behaviors will not be tolerated. Organizations should educate their employees about workplace bullying and create a policy and procedures for addressing reports of bullying fairly and promptly. Consultation with legal counsel may also be advisable to ensure that liability concerns are adequately addressed. By promoting a psychologically healthy workplace and taking steps to prevent and address negative workplace behaviors, employers can create a work environment where employees and the organization thrive.
Are there times when yelling seems necessary?
Yeah.
Are there times when it seems like it's over the line or unnecessary?
Yes.
All right, so, you know, bullying is not harassment, and bullying right now is not against the law per California law. Although, what's that?
So that's next year.
Yeah, that's next year. The key kind of consideration here is if you're raising your voice, because like I said, in your industry, there's a lot of yelling, a lot of telling somebody to, do this or that. Is it business related? Is it really related to, accomplishing something? Or are you just being overly, mean to somebody? So let me ask you, when you're screaming at somebody, why are you screaming at somebody in this?
Talking loudly to make sure there's no misunderstanding.
Making sure there's no misunderstanding?
All it is.
Well, they're doing something unsafe over and over again. You're telling you got to protect them. So, how else do you get it in their head?
Right. It's a safety issue, and you need to emphasize the importance of not doing whatever they're doing, right?
If you're telling me to duck, you're more than welcome to yell at me.
If you're telling you to duck, you can raise your voice.
They could be wearing earplugs.
Could be wearing earplugs. Obviously, if there's a sound issue. So bullying in general, right, increases the risk, unreasonable behavior. So I think that's the critical term here. Is it reasonable for what you're doing? Are you a supervisor that's just a jerk to everybody and screams and belittles people? That's probably bullying. It's obviously not good for company culture, but at the same time, you guys have deadlines and a job and safety, so sometimes you do have to raise your voice, and sometimes you're dealing with people that maybe it takes a little while for the message to sink in, right? So what is bullying behavior? What we're talking about is the difference between abuse and insults versus something that actually has a necessity in the workplace, right? And only you really know whether what you're doing is necessary or if you're going over the top. And I suspect sometimes people are going over the top, and frustrations are high. But one thing about bullying that's really important is we talk about all those protected categories of harassment and so forth. Even if bullying per se is not illegal, there's a good chance that a good attorney is going to say, yeah, he's being bullied on account of X, Y, or Z, right? You might be yelling at somebody because they're perpetually late or they're not getting the job done, but they may also be a member of a protected category, So again, heightened awareness of what you're saying and how it's coming across. Is the criticism justified, right? Are you telling someone they're an idiot, or are you telling them they're, you need to do this differently, right? Let's talk about what's not bullying. Performance goals, work hours, following a reasonable process. It's not bullying if somebody's consistently late and you give them a stern talking to about being on time, right? That has a legitimate business interest. But part of this training is just keep in mind what really is necessary for the job versus what is just over the top and it could potentially create a problem with morale, right? Talked about this before. All of these protected classes are potentially harassment reasons that one can be harassed. So I'm not going to beat a dead horse on that one. And we've also talked about this. We kind of went over this in the last presentation. But obviously, if somebody comes and says they're being harassed, take it seriously. Know the company policy. Don't promise to keep it confidential because you have to do an investigation. If someone feels they're being harassed, very well may turn out after investigation they weren't being harassed, but have to take it seriously. Tell somebody else, human resources, document it. Don't keep it to yourself. Don't retaliate. We kind of worked through this one already. But obviously, if somebody comes to you and reports, hey, I think I'm being harassed or I feel harassed, be sure you continue to treat that person in the same way you were prior to them coming in. Don't demote them, transfer them, don't terminate them. All right. We've gone through some of these examples of retaliation already. Let's do a couple more hypotheticals, and then I think we can probably wrap it up, okay? Putting a picture of your wife wearing a bikini in an area visible to others. Is that okay? Depends on how your wife looks in a bikini.
It doesn't matter.
Yeah. There's no point, right? There's no need for something like that. Yeah, no different than the calendar. Don't go near that issue. Some of this we've kind of gone through. How about this move right here?
Classic.
The classic harassment move.
She don't look happy.
One of so Felice, our company, Felice Insurance, one of our first sort of ads it literally was a picture of someone that looked like this, and it said, Felice Insurance, your friend with benefits. Like, this is the worst advertisement for our company ever. So we have evolved since then. Being that this is an all-male population, or that there's a lot of guys here, how about a gay joke, right? Is that all right?
It's a protected class.
Totally a protected class. And, it doesn't... there's no reason to tell a joke like that, right? Stay away from that kind of stuff. How about asking a coworker about their heritage based on the color of their skin?
No.
So dangerous.
Not absolutely.
I think the critical response is it's still dangerous, right? It is. I mean, maybe it could be a completely innocuous question, but it's dangerous, right? So context and know your audience. I think we've gone through some of these. How about this one? Coworker emails another coworker going through a tough time with the following message: God has a plan for you. He will help you through this very tough time. Who thinks it's okay?
Depends on how well you know.
Yeah, it's got to be genuine.
It's got to be genuine.
Religious context thing can be dangerous too.
Yeah, I mean, anything, moral of the story, anything can be dangerous. I think it's okay, frankly. I don't think it's over the line. I think it's probably okay. But again, context and, knowing your audience. All right. Heightened standard of conduct at work. Make sure that this trickles down to all the people that you oversee because you're responsible for them. Just keep in mind, this is a very employee-friendly state and time, and it's never been as serious as it is now. So just be aware of that and take that away. That's it. Thanks.